I'm recording.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes, it does.
Excuse me, my grey aunt is a monkey. I find this conversation
taking some interest in learning a bit more about technology, philosophy, and I like to.
I'm an educator.
Absolutely. We're going to stay anonymous.
That's a cop out.
The binary's gone. I thought jingle was like Dutch for cheers.
Welcome to Beyond Binary Thinking, your late night stoned and drunk conversation with friends, even when you don't have any weed or wine.
The principle of this podcast is simple. We maintain that anytime someone has trapped their thinking in a false dichotomy, such as left versus right, us versus them, or good versus evil, then they're oversimplifying and preventing dialogue by limiting what could be a rich conversation to the equivalent of a parliamentary debate.
We've got some brilliant feedback from last episode. I'd like to thank Bijal for telling us how much she's enjoying the earlier episodes. I cringe when I hear back to them. We've come a long way, but she said still found them enjoyable. I think the best summary I've heard of the podcast so far is that we talk about really controversial topics. We disagree extremely, and then we laugh about it and move on regardless. So thanks for that. Some of the feedback we got from the earlier episodes, though, is that we take too long getting started. So without further ado, let's just jump straight in. Today we're going to talk about happiness and purpose in life. So let's jump in immediately and talk about what everyone's most controversial opinion is on this topic.
Mine is that we shouldn't pursue happiness. I think like Zizek.
Oh,
Yeah. Zizek said, why be happy when you can be interesting? Maybe we shouldn't be trying to search for happiness, but then I guess that does depend to some extent on how we define the word happiness.
Finn.
I got out of there.
The old philosopher's cliche.
What about you guys?
I think there's definitely a connection between meaning and happiness. And meaning usually leads to happiness, but happiness is not a necessity for meaning. There's a relation between the two, but maybe not a direct one. Maybe meaning is part of what creates someone to be happy.
Well, before we dive in then, I'm just going to say mine. I think consumerism gets tied in with happiness and it's just unsustainable. The idea that always wanting something newer and shiny and better, keeping up with the Joneses or the Kardashians more recently. And I think that's just part of what drives a lot of dead-end pursuits of happiness. Constant pursuit of happiness for itself in and of itself is a dead end psychologically, philosophically. Really is just rearranging the deck chairs of the Titanic on a culture that chases shallow ego rather than sustainable meaning.
Right. So in that regard, I would have to agree. I would have to say my controversial opinion is not so controversial at all, because it's an opinion basically founded on the ideas of Gautama Buddha 500 years before Christ. So that is more than 2,500 years ago. And he said something very similar to Chris, basically pointing out the difference between the short term and the long term. Buddha pointed out that been translated as suffering for a long time, dukkha. More recently, people have been trying to translate it a little bit differently. Sort of like misalignment. And this spiritual misalignment causes us to desire. The way we have been trying to cessate that desire is by more short-term means than long-term means, especially I think recently. And I think recently more so with the advance of the fossil fuels. This introduction of petrochemicals 150 years ago catapulted society into new degrees of desire fulfillment, much faster, easier ways of desire fulfillment. But at the same time, it's not fulfilled any of the more sustainable, as Chris mentioned. The word sustainable is very accurate, I think, for it. Something which maybe takes away the need for desire, which is what the Buddhist technique has been long about, right? Look at the core of what desire is, and if you take the desire away, there's no need to fill the desire. But I don't think what Chris is saying, I don't think that's the way the world's been going. I think we're stuck in a ego-feeding loop, desire-feeding loop, consumerist loop.
What I think's most fascinating and tragic about this is that I've seen Buddhism become commoditized. There are now apps you can download and courses you can do, training you can pay for. And I think one of my controversial opinions, living for half my life in Asia and being surrounded by Buddhism and seeing, the hypocrisy that every organized religion suffers from. I have a more pragmatic and less idealized version of Buddhism than a lot of people. And I do worry right now that Buddhism's being sold as the silver bullet, the panacea for everything that's wrong with our modern anime, right? But problematically, I don't think it's right for everyone. And I think it's like anything, it's as good as the teacher, and it's not one size fits all. And I do see people.
It's not a one thing though, I would say, right? You're painting it very much as a one thing, right?
But the westernized import that I see most frequently people rubbing up against is a bit of that,
Yeah,
right?
but is that the fault of Buddhism or is that the fault of consumerist capitalist society?
Just what I was going to
Absolutely
say.
no, I think
Because at the same time, it's sort of a
no.
You're on the podcast with maybe all of us have been influenced by Buddhism in a positive way, and I know lots of people that have grabbed certain parts of it and made that work for them and used tools to turn them into happier, more interesting people. I think we'll get down to the nitty gritty of those things later on. Is the fact that people take it for the wrong thing necessarily does it take away from the thing itself?
No, and part of it might be me gatekeeping and judging people who are taking the first steps on that journey. I just worry when, there's an app for that is the answer, and it's that shallow mindfulness. And we've all encountered like people who are kind of using Buddhism as a crutch or a painkiller to avoid facing some hard realities. And so they label everything like a Buddhist monk would as, oh, nothing is bad or good intrinsically. It's just all part of the thing. And you're like, yeah, but I'm not sure that's what's happening here. I think you're just in denial of the reality and acting like you're a senior Buddhist monk. But yeah.
Maybe, but on the other hand, whatever makes you cope.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I'm not saying it's worse than how I handled my tragedies, which we could get into now if you want. Start talking about hedonism. I think before we get too deep into Buddhism, let's maybe bring the Western traditional classical philosophical perspective. Could you give us a bit of a summary, Finn?
Yeah, sure. We can divide happiness into two types. And one is the kind of psychological sense, or maybe a psychological state. It's like the state of mind of being happy. And then the other second definition of happy could be something like a life that goes well for the person leading it, right? So in the first one, we talk about the sense of satisfaction, pleasure, a positive emotional condition. Whereas in the second definition, we're talking about value. We're talking about well-being. We're talking about welfare, this kind of thing. So the key distinction between them would be the value judgment in the second type. So the first type is almost can be measured scientifically.
And it's quite fleeting and temporary, right? You have a good mood. Yeah, you have a good day.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've all been happy. We've all been sad. I think everyone's tried to be happy. And sometimes you just can't do it. It's just like there's things in your mind or whatever it is, or emotions, and it's not really happening. But then, also something really bad can happen to you and you can still be kind of happy. You can still have that kind of state of mind. But the second definition it focuses maybe more on it goes a bit deeper. This is to do with whether things are good for you or not. And then you get into the balance between social and individual values, and then that creates maybe the kind of fertile philosophical ground that we can explore in the episode.
Superb.
So one great example of that is Genghis Khan, right? You could say Genghis Khan had a happy life.
I bet he had a whale of a time.
He was a great inspirational leader, right? He was successful.
Yeah.
But he just had a very different value system to the one we hold today, for example. So this explores the nuance here in the philosophical sense.
Were his values that different to the values that we hold today?
Well, you can take a different example of Hitler. Hitler was a very driven, very successful person, but he had completely different set of values.
With success, you're pointing to a very important thing, which historically mattered, I think, a lot more than today, which is that objective achievements. Happiness was also outside of the individual, right? And then psychology during last century moved more and more towards a subjective feeling. But for many years, like your achievements in life was what mattered, right?
Your legacy, right?
Yeah. And only fairly recently it's become something more personal, subjective, individualistic, which is the way society's been moving anyway. But Chris, you mentioned hedonistic, right? And I think if the opposite of hedonistic, and I only today in my research found that out, is a word called oidaimonia. And oidaimonia refers to the more complete, rounded, and sustainable well-being, rather than the immediate gratification, which hedonism is more pointed towards. Right, and this comes from antiqual philosophy, but I think it parallels what the Buddha is saying a lot about the short-term fulfillment of desire versus the longer sustainable removal of desire, right, or harmony with desire.
So before we get too philosophical, I'm going to share my life experience with hedonism. I had an 8-year relationship, and when it ended, my whole life fell apart. All my goals and aims and relationships and who I knew and who I was and who I thought I was and my plan and everything. And it's not just, the sadness of that relationship, but everything. You lose your sense of self, you lose your purpose, you lose so many things. And I think part of the problem as well is that, I'd been with that person from when I was young, and then suddenly I find myself in my late 20s, right? Like just waking up and being like, I don't know who I am or what I'm about or what I'm doing.
Yeah, like an identity crisis of sorts,
and
right?
At first I was like, brilliant, fresh start. And then within a month, I'm like, fuck, fresh start, like what that truly means. And just got so lost and so, genuinely depressed, the sort of depressed where you're having to get dragged out of bed in the morning. Yeah, I wouldn't even say sadness, because that level of depressedness where you're just like nothing matters. And sadness would be stopping to think and feel for yourself, and you don't want to do that even. So just ended up drowning myself in as much alcohol as I could get my hands on, and any drugs I could get my hands on, and as much sex as physically possible. I don't know if really we want to get into it.
So no, but like how was that for you, right? Like how was that for you?
It was
lots of
fun.
Drugs, lots of sex, lots of parties.
Yeah, it was fun. Like, I'm not gonna lie, but it had to be. It had to always be fun. You talked about happiness being a short-term thing. I had to always be happy, because the moment the ride stopped, I was fucking miserable.
Exactly.
So it's like you're in a car, and you know that expression, if you're going through hell, keep going. And there's some truth to that, but I don't think hedonism's the right car to get you out from the other side.
I would disagree with that. If you're in hell, turn around and go another way, right?
Yeah. And the truth is that, you couldn't philosophically have told me to do something different at the time. That's just what I thought I needed, and it got me through it, for better or for worse. But the wake of what I was leaving were bunch of upset people, like friends I sort of let down, right? Because I was just always a drunk mess. Business partners that were frustrated with me. And just over 100 girls who I was always honest with them. So I didn't lie and tell them, oh, I love you, like I want a relationship with you. I was always very clear, right? Like, I've just had my heart broken, I'm looking for a relationship. But I think they found that honesty disarming, which made it all the easier. And like looking back, they did have hopes and expectations that something might come from that relationship, and didn't realize, the girl I was dating for lunch and sleeping with didn't realize I'd had a date for breakfast, nor that I had another date set up for dinner time. Like,
okay, so but aside from the congratulations, you had sex stories.
Well, but like I say though, I'm leaving
Chris,
a wake of
you're not
hearts,
doing
right?
that anymore, right?
No,
but you're not doing that anymore. So does this mean this short-term fulfillment of desire and constant trying to peak has taken place for something else?
Yeah, what changed, Chris, between that hedonistic period and period after, where you did something different?
Honestly, probably, frankly, I just ran out of money. There's only so long you can sustain.
But I don't think this is true. I don't think this is true, because if you look at the research into how money ties up with happiness, there are two types of interrelationship money has with happiness, and we see that in the bottom economy, up to a certain mean, there's a hard relationship between happiness and money, right? Until a certain amount, you
Yeah.
need the money to be happy. And then what we then see is above that amount, the relationship between happiness and your how much money you have starts to decrease until there is no relationship anymore at all.
Mhm.
And so, Chris, what you're saying is that with many millions in the bank, you will always be happy because you just can go right this hedonistic path. But listen, we've seen Hollywood. People try to do this there, right?
Yeah.
And we've had sort of the playground there. We can observe it. We've had sort of the mouse village there as a scientific lab. We can see what happens. I don't think it makes people genuinely happier.
No, I think Jim Carrey speaks about it most eloquently, where he's like, I wish everybody could be infinitely rich and infinitely famous and have everything their heart desires. And then they would realize that in fact doesn't make you happy and they can get on with what matters, right? I think Alan Watts says it beautifully, where he's like, imagine if you went to sleep and you could vividly dream and you could imagine the perfect life for yourself and you could imagine living a 70-year life in one night's sleep. And you did that repeatedly, and you just lived every experience of perfect fantasy happening, right? Everything you wanted, and you'd get bored of it, right?
You would eventually come back to the original life that you have now because it has enough challenge.
Yeah, because it's challenge
That's
and
the
chaos.
idea, right?
and you have to muddle through.
It's unpredictable.
So just to clarify, I agree with you, Meringue, but I wasn't saying that money is the answer. I'm saying that I was sustaining an unsustainable, unhappy life. And when I ran out of money, then I had nothing. And the friends I was buying beers for disappeared, and the friends that weren't interested in drinking that much had already been pissed off with me and disappeared, and the girls stopped calling. And then I realized I'd not been building a life with any sustainability or meaning, like other than just the next restaurant, the next bar, the next hotel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not that I think, as you say, celebrities with loads of money realize it's shallow, but maybe it takes them a little bit longer because they've got a little bit more money in the bank.
Well, I think money will buy you happiness.
Yeah, I totally agree.
For a while, and I think you can even live your entire life buying happiness, certain amount of happiness for money, and it'll
temporary shallow.
Yeah, here we're talking about the first type of happiness, right? We're talking about the state of mind, not the value.
Yeah, a life lived well with honor. And
we're not talking about that. We're talking about the first kind, the psychological state, because we definitely can buy it. You know?
Well, Meringue, I think the point you said earlier, and it's true. I looked at the same or similar research, and it said that pretty much up to $75,000 a year, right? You're going to keep getting happier with that increase of salary, but above there, just the correlation between income and happiness.
But there's another correlation between happiness and material wealth. And there's a third factor, which is maturity, right? When you're young, happiness can be very easily fulfilled with material means. But as you mature, with not age, but mature, I think being the central thing, you'll start to look for more meaning to create happiness, right? Do you guys recognize in that? Because I think if you don't mature, you can grow very old and fulfill happiness with material means. My rich friend that is very wealthy, and he's in the 70s and he'll buy girlfriends that are in their 20s. He thinks he's deriving happiness from that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
His less mature mind agrees with that. His more mature mind is panicking, which is in his subconscious below there. But he's pushing it into his subconscious, I think.
I totally agree. Don't you think that it has something to do with the kind of values that you choose to make important? Because that's what we're talking about in that second type of happiness. It's like if you value money, for example, you're gonna keep trying to get more and more and more money, and you're never gonna reach the point where you're actually fulfilled. Whereas if you take, for example, freedom, maybe that $75,000 is going to get you the basics of the basic freedom package, And then if you're a millionaire, maybe you're not gonna have freedom because you're gonna be worrying about money, investments, loans, helping people out, and then maybe that makes you less free. So I think you're right, Moraine, that it changes to do with the different types of values that you choose. And you could perhaps apply maturity to the different values, although perhaps that's tricky.
I don't think it's tricky if you look at child development. If you look at just how people develop as humans, there is a growing maturity, and with growing maturity, there's less of a fulfillment through materialistic means and more of a fulfillment through sort of intrinsic meaning And I think there's been anthropological research that has been pointing out. I've read a study that's describing it, that relationship.
The problem with money, though, is it's a trap, right? And
Yeah.
so who's hanging out with gold-digging 20-year-olds? I mean, they might not be gold-digging. They might just have daddy issues. I don't know. But they're hanging out with people that are drawn to his money. And that's the trap, right? Because then once you're a millionaire, you tend to surround yourself with people who also have got that frame of mind where they've ended up in that position. And that becomes the trap of it, in that you're surrounded by people who share those values. And so you talk about maturity and learning, but no man is an island. And it's very difficult to learn a different way when this thing becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you surround yourself by people who like you because of your money, it's going to be very difficult to get out of that trap and that cycle.
Yeah, definitely. It becomes an echo chamber, and that's one of the things that we're trying to reach beyond with our podcast, I think, right? As to how can we get ourselves out of these echo chambers.
I'm just trying to get money, mate. Failing miserably, but trying.
But that depends as well, and if you think getting out of the echo chamber, and if you think knowledge is even how often have you not heard the ignorance is bliss, right? Knowledge is a burden type of expression. And in our age of fake news as well, aren't people trying to escape reality to find happiness elsewhere? Rather than within reality, they're trying to find reality outside, or happiness outside of reality.
Depends on your knowledge, doesn't it? Because there's a lot of knowledge out there. I think reading the news every day is proven to make you more depressed. Being on social media, you'd know a lot more, I guess, but it's what kind of knowledge are you filling your head with, right?
Right.
Okay, let me pose this for you, right? Because you're saying exactly what the point I'm trying to get to is that reading the news is getting you depressed. But there's a good reason for this, because we're heading into climate apocalypse doom. And I don't want to be the pessimist, but here's the thing. Are we allowed to be unhappy as well? Because I read a really good book from a philosopher, Willem Schmidt, called Being Unhappy. And he's pointing towards that we're in an age of melancholy. And the melancholy is fueled by the fact that we're in a realistically dire situation currently with humanity. And I think there's no way around it. All the alarm bells are saying we're not at the beginning, we're in the middle of this impending climate doom. The people that are unhappy are also the people that are aware of this, right? That are sounding the alarm bells. Because the positive people are like, I'm in my positive vibe, right? I don't want a negativity around me. I want to go, sell, right?
Ours isn't the first generation to have apocalyptic predictions, though,
Ours
right?
is the first ours is the first generation where every scientist is agreeing.
98% of scientists agree.
We're there. Like, I'm sorry. There's an increasingly bigger population that doesn't believe in science, but just science is real, and the scientists agree. We're heading into the doom.
Oh, and by the way, the 2% that disagree.
Short-term
are
doom.
geologists that often work for Shell or BP, right?
Nah.
Just to clarify, the 2% disagreeing. Yeah, they're not climate change.
I think it's a great point, Moraine. I think it might take us on a bit of a tangent, because then we start getting into like a critique of psychologists.
We're talking about happiness,
right?
Where's my happiness
Do we
in
deserve
30
to
years?
Be happy, right? If the world's going to shit, what sort of idiot wants to be happier? Like, fix the problem,
Yeah, let's
right?
fix it.
Yeah.
The house is on fire,
Like,
and we're like, but
how
do we
happy
be
should you
about
be
this?
that your house is burning down? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but just
It's
change
fine.
your attitude, Moraine. Come on, think positive.
Yeah.
That part of the house isn't on fire yet. So come on.
Come on, be
But that's
thankful
what
for
they're
something.
telling me right now. That is exactly what they're telling me right now. So no, I'm pissed off. We need radical change, and there's not enough people
Yeah.
pissed off enough.
Chris, you've talked before. You've mentioned in previous episodes about what are the reasons for emotions. That there's some sort of evolutionary reason why we have these emotions. So maybe that could be of relevance here, talking about sadness,
Yeah.
anger, these kind of more negative
So I
emotions.
think it's part of
Is
the
there a
problem
reason?
with Buddhism being used as a painkiller to emotions. I think it's necessary to feel those emotions. The anger Meringue describes when something's broken and nothing's being done about. It is a necessary instinct that we have for good reason.
Right.
There's all sorts of malaise. Like, it's interesting looking at the things, and if you're not doing better this year than you were last year, right? You get concerned and you get bored and you get frustrated and stress levels increase. Now, from a Buddhist perspective, you could say, but you should learn to be content where you are. But from a let's make society and the world a better place perspective, what's wrong with that instinct? Isn't it entirely natural to be like, okay, guys, how do we make things better? I'm feeling uncomfortable with things aren't getting better, right? That's a completely understandable instinct to have. Mm-hmm. Rather than, like train our minds to accept the sadness in the world, which some of these mindfulness courses and apps do. I think Meringue's absolutely right. Like, what can we fix? And I think there's nothing better for long-term sustained positive life than trying to make life better for yourself and for those around you. I think you can get pretty sad if you're trying to fix 7 billion people's problems. So it's good to kind of like think globally, act locally, right? There's only so much of a burden you can take on. As Jordan Peterson says, tidy your room before you try and fix the bigger problems.
He's right there.
You're pointing a lot at the faults of the sort of the app Western Buddhist movement, the Buddhist movement for the look, right?
Yeah.
The statues in the home that look so pretty, but there's nothing else going on. But listen, the Buddhist, like, we all agree that there's different types of Buddhism available for everyone online. Anyone can look it up. Anyone can get deep into it. And Buddhists do talk about maintaining the house, right? And the house is also the body where the mind houses. Maintain of your body, maintain of your speech, maintain of your food, maintain of your thoughts, maintain of the house you live in, maintain of the environment you live in. I think to a point we need to do that. I think even if the world goes to doom, that's the choice I made. Even if the world goes to doom and I accepted that it might do, I still want to maintain of myself and my temple. But I also think, and Finn, you shared a video today about this, is that we can't do it ourselves. There's a lot asked of consumerists already. But it's not in the hands of the consumerists. We're getting fucked over by global powers. And I think their sense of maintained happiness is get as lot of money as we can, build enclaves where we can survive with our grandchildren. Fuck the rest.
Well, then we get a bit into Illuminati there, don't we? The underground secret bases. No, but I see your point.
I think for a while, human society wanted to elevate the entirety of human society. And I think more and more income inequality has grown to a point with the impending climate change that it's sort of a screw you, I got mine, right? I'll get mine.
So when I was looking at the stats, it's really interesting that most countries have gone up in happiness, and happiness does relate to GDP and it relates to economic growth. And there's two interesting exceptions. One is America, where happiness has been going down in the last few years. And part of the reason for that is because of rising income inequality. And actually, people are happiest when income inequality decreases.
Well, you can see that in the Scandinavian countries, which are top 5 in any list about happiness, right? The Nordic countries, including Holland, the welfare state countries, where it's all equalized, highly taxed, socialists. They're all being reported in the stats as being the happiest countries. Although I do think we should question the stats.
Going by that logic, the UK must be terribly unhappy because it has one of the biggest income inequality gaps in the world, isn't it?
Well, again, like if you dig into those statistics, the problem is you have a bunch of Saudi and Russian billionaires investing in London. I think the UK actually so actually as a population, the UK's all right. But like the problem with unsustainable housing in the UK is that people are just using it to launder money. I think however many houses, the percentage of houses in London that aren't actually occupied is ridiculous.
Think about, Chris, the UK, the banking system, laundering money, offshore tax havens. This just sounds very new to me. I can't...
No. Do you remember when we found out all those politicians were laundering money in Panama and then they all got punished and the whole thing stopped and it's not happening anymore?
That was great,
You'll be glad to hear. That's brilliant.
I loved it when it happened.
but to get back to the subject, right? Like, why does income inequality matter for happiness? And I think it has to do with, you're talking about as well, houses being empty. There's the pyramid, right? The pyramid of satisfaction. And this is, if you have your bases covered, then you can rise up and look for meaning in life. But what if the bases are becoming more and more harder to fulfill, right?
Yeah, the basic physical, like shelter, physical comfort, food.
Access to water, access to food, healthy food.
Yeah, and this is why I do believe evolutionary psychology has something to teach here, because for me, it kind of matches my conception of people belonging to a tribe, or at least wanting to, right? And it speaks volumes to me that actually it's not enough for just you yourself to be doing really well, but you want your tribe to be succeeding as well. Despite the caricature of, a Republican oil baron, right? Lighting cigars with $100 bill. Most people are happier when they feel that they themselves are doing better and their team are doing better too. That is a natural instinct we have, which I think is lovely. And if we want to build a better society, we need to harness that, right? Rather than.
But the concept of what your tribe is the problem is it's so shifty nowadays. Before, you were part of a tribe in the jungle and you would know it because those were the people living with you, and the other tribe were miles so far away. And nowadays, it's what are you? Like, people are grasping back to nationalism.
Yeah, people.
Right,
because
you're there in the UK.
Right?
You don't consider yourself European tribe anymore, which people still.
Lorraine, that's the Brexit buzzer.
yourself
Don't mention it.
Great British tribe. Right?
Don't mention it, Lorraine.
But you're
Don't talk about the
This is
war.
starting to become like a Godwin. Like, don't invoke the Nazis. Don't invoke the Brexit. Wow. I guess we know at which point Brexit has become, right?
Welcome to Beyond Brexit.
No, but I think it's shifty. You have multiple identities, and you can grab towards any one identity at a different time, and it's fluctuating the way you express your identity as well.
Do you think that's why politics is becoming so tribalistic? Because people are longing for these groups, which they're no longer. We've joined in bigger and bigger alliances, right? These global trade organizations, and it's just too big and too nebulous and incomprehensible. And do you think there's this longing? Do you think the whole purpose of Beyond Binary, we're dealing with a symptom of a bigger problem?
For sure.
I don't know whether the solution is in breaking down kind of tribal and nationalistic identities, or trying to forge some kind of supra identity. And that's really fascinating in conservation and this idea of the ecosystem, the globe, Gaia.
I would like a local community. And I know that's not very popular, but I kind of would like the idea of forming a community. Like I say, you can think globally, but act locally. So actually rebuilding that, because the last 40 years or whatever, people have been moving from city to city, wherever the job is, and no identity and no roots. And that's why you don't give a shit throwing rubbish away, because, you're going to be living in another house in 5 years' time anyway. So if your neighbour thinks you're a dickhead, fine, don't talk to him, whatever. And I think that's part of what leaves people to feel aimless and not responsible for society around them, because we're just migrant workers. We're working in offices instead of farms, but it's not that different.
I'd like to make a counterpoint there. What about the younger generation who are coming through now, who are really angry about climate change, and they're getting organised, and they're getting globally organised? And they have this sense of identity of they're the future generation, and the problems that we're creating now, they're the ones who are going to pay the burden for that. So maybe this is some kind of constructed identity across a bigger, wider tribe that could maybe see solutions.
Not the first young generation to get pissed off with the older generation.
No, but they're probably the most right historically. No, maybe anti-war could have some good points. Anti-nuclear. The destruction of the planet, that's pretty important, isn't it?
You need to globalize, I think, because you need to have laws that are imposed upon all countries to make sure that there's not going to be a single country that fucks it up for all the rest of them, right? We've become too powerful nowadays. And that started to become clear with the atomic bomb, right? Oh shit, we're too powerful. Now we need to band together in stronger blocks and make sure that we can control countries in a sort of equilibrium. And climate change is posing a new challenge, right? We can't let one country get away with it. And we are connected nowadays globally. It's the strange thing as well, right? We've, in the last 25, 30 years, we've lived in the global information society. It's still a recent thing. If you compare 30 years, it's not been that long. We're still catching up to the effects of what this is having on everyone.
And we've come a long way. I mean, honestly, in the 50s, you talk to people about don't litter, and people are like, what? What are you talking about? There's plenty more fish in the sea, right? If you look at the changing, no, if you talk to older people in Europe, definitely the environmental movement's grown a lot in the last 50
This
years.
is not true, because in the 70s, there were already an American president talking live on TV about the danger of climate change, and we need to act now, get off of fossil fuels now. And this was in the 70s, right? Like, they're saying 50 years ago, 40, 50 years ago, we need to do it now, and we're still not doing
when
it.
we were in school, they said, we've only got about 20 years left of fossil fuels. I swear that was over 20 years ago. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's a myth peddled by the fossil fuels industry to justify whacking up the price.
They got us there, didn't they? They had me, hook, line and sinker.
So, my dad, who apparently listens to the podcast, hi Dad, he comes from the oil industry.
He comes from there.
And he was describing... born and raised in oil pits, son.
Chris, account for your sins.
You know how many lights I've turned off, but it hasn't quite made up for the billions of barrels of oil he was burning. So he was talking to Americans about this, and they thought the Europeans were fucking mental. They were like, look, simply put, there's only 20 years worth of oil left on the planet. If we don't burn it, China will, so I'd rather we burn it and make the profit on it. Like, come on. Like, that was the attitude. They're like, fuck environmentalism. The oil's going to get burnt by someone. We need to burn it as quick as we can so we make all of the money. That's the attitude.
Right. So that's why you need a global organization. That's why international law failed. It's why international cooperation failed. England wants to leave the EU. It means global cooperation failed.
Because that's the problem. Like, that's what I was going to say. Finn was talking about, and you were both saying politicians 20 years ago were talking about that, but politicians aren't the ones with power, right? Yeah. It's big corporations that actually are pulling the strings there. So, okay, we need massive world government, but also communities on a local level, right?
I think that's probably...
But communities on the thing is, communities on a local level, this is not a top-down thing. This is a bottom-up. It will be created from the bottom up. It's like grass growing from the bottom. It arises.
Well, that's the dream, but you've heard of astroturfing, right? The illusion of making a grassroots campaign. So the Tea Party in America was presented as a bottom-up grassroots campaign, but it was actually just press releases being made by the Koch brothers. So how do we stop money corrupting your bottom-up?
You don't. This episode is about happiness, and what I'm saying is you're still trying to save the future. I'm saying the future is doomed. Try to be happy no matter the fact that the future is doomed. So how do we get happy?
Or nihilism.
How do we get happy regardless of the fact that the future is doomed?
So I'm a big fan of, like I say, meaningful friendships, helping people around you. I love the idea of having enough money, as Finn says, that you've bought the basic freedom package, and then beyond that, I don't think you need any more. And you should just give it away. Like, money's not meant to be hoarded or possessed like a dragon sitting on a loot of gold. I think just help people around you, learn from them, be happy with them. I think even the British government, who probably aren't experts in happiness, but one of their main statistics is that the number one predictor for a happy life is having 2 friends who live within a mile of you. And it's just things like that which just feed into this idea I have of like just having a village, recapturing that village that I think we long for instinctively, this group of people who have our backs and we have theirs, or sometimes not, because sometimes you do a dick thing and you need that feedback of like, okay, Chris, well, here's why you upset, Finn. So there's some feedback for you.
Yeah, I think it's a really valid point, and I'd like to share a quick anecdote that I met. It was a Buddhist monk that I met, who was an Australian guy who'd been living in Thailand for, at that time, I think about 10 years. And he shared with me an analogy that fits kind of into what you were saying just before the end there, talking about charity or giving. And he said, happiness is like, imagine you're in a pool of water and you're trying to grab the water towards you, trying to get happiness. Well, it just slips through your fingers, doesn't it? So what he said is, if you push the water away and you try and share, your money, your happiness, your time, whatever it is, friendship, you push it out. And because of the ripple effect, it kind of grows and then eventually comes back to you. So it was his kind of hack. And really, he's kind of summarized the whole conversation. It's like, don't try and be happy. Have a good value system that emphasizes those people around you and tries to bring them up with you. And then everyone will be better off together. I think that's a really powerful analogy. That really stuck with me.
I think if you make other people happy rather than yourself, it will get exponentially better.
Yeah, and it's tied into
Which
this.
is, ties into
Yeah.
what Chris started with, is the fact that we're in an ego society. Although I think there's a lot of light still in this ego society. I see plenty of people helping each other and trying to do well for each other.
Yeah, and for the planet, like you look at reforestation is going to be one element of like the big climate change picture, if we can link the two ideas together again. Just getting involved in local planting, for example, you know, it's not a huge project, it's pretty small scale, but it kind of puts you in touch with the local community, and eventually these small actions can lead to bigger changes in the future. This kind of ripple effect.
Let's hope so.
That's going to make you feel better. And Meringue's right. It's not enough to make up for an oil company's negativity. But think about how that looks to an outsider. So I've been rejecting plastic for years, right? Every opportunity, no thanks to a plastic bag, try and remember to bring my own, carry stuff in my big giant arms when I can. There's been a bunch of people who were earlier to this trend. And now you see it on Blue Planet and more people growing. And it's like now less of a weird alien concept. When people see it, that plastic bags are now cost money and they didn't used to, they're like, yeah, people have been going on about this for years. It's not such a weird, what? Sorry, come again? And it's the same, like planting trees is not going to be enough. But when big oil corp gets taxed 5% more for an oil spill, growing number of people are going to be like, yeah, people do actually care about the environment, right? Like this is a growing thing. It can seem huge and daunting and frankly depressing. When you're 17 to 21, you go through that martyr phase and you want to change the world. You get a bit older and you realize that's really difficult. People that seem to do really well are those that engage more locally, or maybe not locally because, as you say, now there's Facebook groups or whatever, but at least within one specific core, they tangibly shift the needle. One of my favorite videos on happiness is by CP Gray. 7 Ways to be Miserable, is it?
Can you give us a summary?
Not of all 7. I think the most important thing relating to what I'm saying here is that you need to aim for something tangible and achievable. And it's very easy to be miserable if you set yourself huge, nebulous, like, I want to end climate change. Okay, I want this country to cut this by this percentage, and I'm going to do that by break it up, right? Break it up into loads and loads of subtasks and be like, what can I do this week to actually make a difference? Because if you just dwell on the million things you need to do, you never move the needle. I'm a big fan of Candide Voltaire. The whole purpose of that book is that they travel all around the world to all these mystical, amazing places, and they're trying to work out, he's a rich prince and he's got his philosopher teacher, and they're trying to work out all different ways of being happy and living all these different philosophical realities. And in the end, they just find they're broke, they end up busy working, and they're working too hard to stop and think and dwell. And that's why they're happiness. Now, part of that is Protestant work ethic. Just shut up and put your head down and work.
Yeah.
Right. You've got to be active and busy. And as much as people, anti-capitalist, people are miserable in their job, you do need some structure and purpose and achievement in your life. And I'm very sorry if someone's job doesn't give them that. But I don't think doing nothing would be a happy life at all. In fact, it would be a recipe for disaster for most people.
For most people. I mean, there's plenty of Buddhists, monks, nuns that live satisfying lives doing not much at all. And they do actually do plenty of things. It's hard, like if you're in the economic grind, you get unhappy. Don't be so hard.
There's a really interesting dichotomy in Stoicism. Earlier we mentioned it and we talked about eudaimonia, this idea of evolving happiness. And if we take it for a minute from the context of kind of the global context, global warming, communities, if we take it back to the individual, there's a key element of Stoicism called the Dichotomy of Control. And this is to do with evaluating what is within your control and what is outside of your control. And Stoicism, modern Stoicism at least, is like a resurgence of these ideas from Greek antiquity. And the idea is to reflect and meditate in their own way, not like Buddhism, on what things are within your control, what things are outside of your control, and what can you do. This is such a big revelation to me, even though it's something that I kind of knew from before, right? Like the Dalai Lama said, or was it Gandhi? I can't remember, it was one of them who said, can you do something about your problem? Well, then don't worry, do something about your problem. Can you not do anything about your problem? Well, then don't worry, because you can't do anything about your problem, right? It's basically that.
This is a pattern we see again and again, right? This is the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom
what's
to know
wrong
the
with that?
difference.
I think what's central as well is that there's a correlation between happiness and the expectation you're
Yeah, that's a
setting
good point.
of happiness, right? if you set your expectation too high, you'll be unhappy. If you set the expectation just right, you'll be happy. If you set your expectation too low, you might still be unhappy because you set it too low.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think that's part of my understanding of evolutionary psychology, and that your esteem and your ego tied to your judgment of how other people view you. So if you look at in the group who should be higher status, that sort of gets worked out between people. Like, so whatever's important to your tribe, right? Be it hunting for woolly mammoths or whoever's helping the environment the most in your Facebook group, right? Like, but whatever, like we naturally are looking to work out what's important to our tribe. And if you do well at that game, then you'll have a sense of pride and your group will look up to you and you'll feel prouder and you'll start talking a bit louder and standing up a bit straighter and people will listen to you more. And that mechanism actually is really useful when it's harnessed in the right way and you have society set up so that we can have that feedback mechanism. We just need to be clear on what is important, and it needs to be a small enough group with an identity that we can harness that instinct.
But here's the question. Can you control the way that other people perceive you? Is that something that's within your control?
So from a Machiavellian perspective, yes. The problem is we do have very strong self-defense instincts against people intentionally manipulating that game, right? I think whether you should control it intentionally, like consciously, is an interesting debate. And I think one of the things I learned from my sister, who's incredibly wise, she said, what other people think of you isn't your business. And I think I've learned a lot from that, but sometimes I think it's wrong as well, because God, it's hard to stop worrying what other people think of you, right?
It seems she may be right, but it's as ancient as humans are.
We've got to remember it. We used to have religion to remember these things, right? And now, well, at least in the Western world, we're lacking some way of enforcing these ideas, of really remembering them.
And it is important, right? If everyone thinks you're a selfish dickhead, that is necessary.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like you can't just be like, oh fuck the haters, I don't care what they think.
You used to be what people would tell you were. This whole sense of I am who I am is very recently in history. Before, if the whole village said you were that, then you were that. There was no other identity than that.
Right? It can be limiting. You can get limited by a small mind mentality, but also it can be, okay, what's our role and what's best for this project we're working on as a community.
Basically, like, you don't get to say whether you're an asshole or not. Like, that's only other people can decide that, right?
So the difference between confidence and arrogance, right? Like someone else will determine that for you. They'll either be like, wow, he's a really confident young man, or wow, he's full of shit.
So to get back to the thing, do you control? Yeah, you control it part way, but part you can't. You can try.
You can
to
influence it, but I don't think you can. It's not within your control.
You can try
right?
to, but yeah, exactly. You can try to.
I found what was really interesting when I was studying some of the links Finn shared was Socrates chastising the Athenians. And he was saying that all they cared for was riches and honor. And for him, like, an important life was about being morally and philosophically right in your actions and building that sort of like character, sort of the values we'd think of like that. And I thought it was interesting that he thought that both riches and honor were separate, because I think that's worth discussing, like, because we value money in our society, and then you see people get to a certain amount of money and then they start, I'm like Bill Gates doing his philanthropic work, right? But what I think he's doing there is raising more social capital. And I found it really interesting that the Greeks saw both money and honor as similar things, and both separate from a good, purposeful life. It's actually just, instead of raising more money, you're raising social capital. You're raising your pride, your esteem. And I think it's often the case where you see upper class people Instagramming, the things they forego, the money they give away.
Right,
to
I saw one the other day, actually today, in fact, and it was people who were Instagramming going on like a refugee diet, so they'll eat the same food as a refugee and then give a little bit of money to refugees, right? And it's like, oh, really? Like, come on.
Yeah, that's it, because we all know the
Yeah,
game they're playing,
it's so obvious.
Right? We all instantly recognize what you're doing. You have money, you can afford to forego money or whatever luxury.
Anywhere near to capturing the like what it would be like to be a refugee. Yeah, they're somehow sort of trying to be like, look at me, I'm living like a refugee.
And they're hiding behind it. I'm raising awareness, and you're like, yeah, you're mostly raising awareness for yourself. It's like when people like run a marathon and then expect you to donate money to charity, and you're like, you're just boasting that you're exercising, really, right?
But then there is a flip side to that, though. There is a flip side to that, which is that like people who run like for charity to raise money, it's usually because they probably had some personal loss recently. They're typically for cancer, right? So maybe like having that personal challenge of being able to run.
Well, I'm not trying to shit on those people.
I mean, like, I'm just saying, I can see the.
I'm not that much of a dick.
I can see why people.
What I'm alluding to is that there's an important dichotomy. There's a balance there.
Yeah.
Right? Like we all, and this hits at the heart of, should we try, can we influence how people think? Well, buyer beware, because we have to do it very carefully, right? We all manage our reputation, but if you're seen to be trying too hard, to be manipulating people's perception of you, we're acutely aware of that. And that gets to the Christian value, and before that, the Greeks, like, but what's actually the reason why you're doing it? What's the reason in your heart, right? Because we want to know, are you actually a good person, or are you just virtue signaling in a Machiavellian style? And the reason for that, again, I think partly comes from evolutionary psychology. We need to know, can I actually trust you, or are you just going to do the right thing when it's publicly expedient? If I go hunting on a 4-day trip with you and you can kill me and steal all my meat, and you'll just say, oh, well, the mammoth did it, right? I need to know, are you actually a good person consistently, or just when it's in your economic self-interest?
I don't know how we can tie this back into happiness.
Because it comes back to my theory that we need a community that we can trust, that we feel a valued member of. You would not be happy if your society was solely people virtue signaling on Instagram to impress each other. Like, you need people you can genuinely trust, who have your back and you have their backs, and you build and grow together. That for me is a life of meaning I'm striving towards.
I'd like to talk about happiness in social media, right? Because with social media, and it's been proven, it's screwing with our sense of happiness. Right? Because what we're doing on social media is we're showing only one particular side of our lives, the glory side. I'm on vacation, I'm having such a great time. And we're putting so much pressure on each other to live great, fantastic, magnificent Instagram lives. And it's not necessarily creating fulfillment, and definitely not creating long-term happiness, which you would get from, as Chris is pointing out, offline truer friendships. So is the internet causing unhappiness? Social media?
I'd say it's even worse than that, because it's not as if people never post sad stuff or, you know, sort of dire, sad situations, or I don't know if you've ever tried posting about veganism, but it doesn't go down very well. No one cares. Like, do you know what I mean? Very rarely do people care. So my point is, like, I think the algorithms kind of hide stuff maybe that doesn't engage people, right? So maybe there's a way to get people talking about certain stuff, but it's quite difficult. Whereas, you know, photos, people love photos. Do you know what I mean? Oh, it's a baby. Like, do you know what I mean? It's like, I think it is playing with our happiness, though. I think in the first sense of our definition of happiness, we talked about it as a psychological state of mind. I think it's kind of rewiring the brain to be like massive, like dopamine junkies, basically. And that's dangerous, because then, you know, we're just being reduced to addicts.
Well, I think you're a dopamine junkie anyway. It's the wrong way to expose it. So you're meant to feel a bit depressed and lonely. So when your mate invites you to his birthday party, you travel 4 hours for it and catch up with mates you haven't seen. And we don't do that so much these days, because we're like, well, you know, like, I've seen what they've been up to in the last 3 years on Facebook, and I haven't been interested in sending them a message in that time. So why would I bother going to that reunion party, right? And that's where you're missing out. That's where you're robbing yourself, because all those little moments of checking the app have meant that you didn't bother going to the reunion, whereas 20 years ago you would have, because you missed them and you were lonely and you needed to catch up with them.
Yeah, I do have a fear with social media that interrupt certain key aspects of life, the help towards real community and happiness gained from real community.
It's the illusion of community, isn't it? Being part of a Facebook group is kind of a community, but like I said,
it is. It's a new form of community, I would say. I just want to make one counterpoint to
Yeah,
earlier.
Not
for
as
the
good.
better.
Not as good. I find.
Sure, it's got its problems. Every community has.
I mean,
Not as fulfilling.
going to the town hall and listening to people speak is boring, but it's a more genuine community, right? This is what I say when people criticize religion. I'm like, yeah, sure. But what's been replaced with the weekly sermon and
TED Talks.
community meetings?
Problem is, people only watch them once. That's the problem. You got to watch them 10
Okay,
times.
yep.
Twice a year. The top 50 twice a year.
And they're,
we'll have it.
they're
Yeah.
impersonal, and you don't get to sit down across from someone that agrees or maybe even disagrees with your opinion.
And here's the joy of a TED Talk. I sit and I listen to it, and some guy says about how someone should fix the world. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. That's how someone should fix the world.
You've done
And
your
I
bit.
share the video, and I feel the dopamine rush. And I didn't actually do anything to fix the world whatsoever. I just went on to the next video and watched that. Like, nothing was done.
Like, we need some kind of system that actually holds us to account for what did we actually do today that made the world a better place, right? For example.
Well, companies use this. So I'm in the business of selling project management tools. And one of the key things it does is it plays on the psychology of how to make teams more productive. The reason why we use Trello for the podcast is you can see people, your fellow team, working on things. And that motivates you to be like, oh, he's put loads of work in, and I'm kind of falling behind. And it's things like that where, yeah, it's an accountable list of actions that people do, right? That's what Trello's for, so that a whole team can see, oh, shit, everyone's working on stuff. Yeah, I better squirrel away too, right? It's my turn. I have a theory about management, mismanagement practices, but we'll save that for another episode.
Nice. What is there anything else? Are there any other topics that we want to touch on? What about Bhutan? We're talking about statistics, weren't we? Happiness by country. What do you reckon of gross national happiness in Bhutan versus GDP, the typical gross domestic product? Thoughts on that?
It's going to differ by culture, isn't it? Can you imagine the backlash in trying to measure happiness in Britain? how well the Brits would respond to
How
it,
happy to feel on a
cynically
scale
they
from
would
1 to
feel
10.
about the whole measure. While doing this survey, fuck off.
Isn't one key feature that these statistics are self-reported?
Yeah, and I find that fascinating. So the rule is, as a country's economy develops, people feel happier, except in communist countries where it's just become ingrained in the culture not to express happiness particularly. And so people spend a lot of time worrying about, oh my God, like Poland's developing economically loads. But when we ask people, are you happy? They're like, nah, like life's shit. But on other measures, not so self-reporting, but, you know, donations to charity and time spent outdoors and gifts and other indirect measures of happiness, people were objectively happier. But yeah, if you just ask people in a survey, are you happy, and you know it, clap your hands and count how many hands clap. You're frequently disappointed.
And in the
by
Latin
results.
countries, South America, there were quite a lot of countries which had kind of lower GDP, but were kind of reportedly happier, right? Did you see those stats as well?
Costa Rica is the famous example of that. It's like in the top 10 happiness rated countries with very low life expectancy, low GDP. I think it's difficult because, like, what are we surveying? What are the questions being asked? You know, how does this quantitative surveying translate into qualitative experience of happiness? What the Bhutanese pointed out, and this is a while ago already. Like, time they started really talking about gross national happiness, I was still in high school, I think. And nowadays it's become a bit more accepted. You see economists talking about the fact that we shouldn't just measure GDP as a measurement of the growth of society, of the development of society. Their happiness is more increasingly being accounted for as a thing that matters.
Well, as I've said in a previous episode, GDP is a horrible measure. So if someone gets cancer, the GDP of a country goes up, right? For all sorts of reasons, GDP is very, very flawed as a measure.
We still use it, right? We still expect the GDP to rise by 3% every year, basically double it in, 24 years? And that is counterintuitive to other measurements, right? And we're still measuring in GDP. It's still a thing that matters, even though it shouldn't maybe. But as many Nobel laureates can say that it shouldn't, and then business influence still say it does.
I want to make a quick point about Bhutan and the happiness. In the 90s, about 100,000 Hindu Nepalese residents, that's about 28% of the population, were forcibly expelled from Bhutan after the royal decree that made it mandatory to wear the national costume. So actually, like this idea that Bhutan is the happiest place on the world is based on this pretty brutal, like, anti-immigrant drive, right?
Yeah, they're very cultural purists. If you're part of this cultural purity, then you're very happy.
Well, it's like the school I went to got consistently good grades and boasted about that statistic. But that's because if you got low grades, they'd kick you out the school. So they're like, yeah, everyone that's still here has survivor bias.
Let's not judge for, I think this is research from the 1990s. Bhutan has changed since then. If no one has read anything about this in the last 10 years.
It's another example, though, of people holding up Asia on a pedestal.
I'm not discounting it. I'm just saying, we just got to look at more detail and just see exactly what is the picture.
They used to be more exclusionist, isolationist, and I do remember the situation from back then.
There's a really interesting TED talk from, I think he's one of the politicians from Bhutan, and he's explaining about the whole thing. It's really worth a watch. But yeah, he goes into it and the more recent changes after that period in their history, which was, 30 years ago nearly.
That's probably still ongoing.
There are a few examples where people hold an Asian country up on a pedestal, and the truth on the ground is slightly less rosy. I alluded to this earlier with my experience of Buddhism in Thailand, and beautiful country, wonderful religion, but yeah, when you get closer to the culture for long enough, the rose-tinted glasses come off, and the Thais, even couched in Buddhism, and it's not, I don't think, Buddhism, it's culture. And the old culture that religions naturally meld to, right? Fuse with. But there are some pretty odd, anti-disabled, quite racist views that get tied in with how they talk about Buddhism that I think from a Western perspective, if that was being translated, people would be pretty horrified by. So, and I'm not saying that that's representative of Thailand or Buddhism in general, but I just think often the rosy picture that gets put up on a pedestal, we could be more like Bhutan. It's like, well, are you sure you'd want to be, or just the version of the story we learn, right?
I'm definitely not saying we should be more like Bhutan. Bhutan was one of the first countries in the 90s that started talking about measuring the growth and the well-being of a country in terms of happiness rather than in terms of economic scale. And it seems like you have an axe to grind with Buddhism. Maybe I shouldn't have started talking about Buddhism this podcast. For me, you can substitute it by any other spiritual growing means. There are many names for many different traditions that can help you grow and find happiness and meaning in life. I mentioned Buddhism purely because it's one of the ancient traditions that really deals with the question of happiness and unhappiness and where does it arise from. And thus I thought it was interesting. I think the world is corrupt. That's what you're pointing out, Chris. Very true. And I think there's a percentage of people that find meaning and value in whatever they can find it in. Let it be Buddhism, let it be any other tradition they find it in. Doesn't really matter. I think we all agree that we hope that people find it. Because I guess we all agree that even though there is fun to be had in short-term failure of pleasure, in the dopamine rush, be it sex, be it drugs, and I don't think any of us are going to be celibate human beings. So let's all just enjoy, but also realize that within this short fulfillment of happiness, this short fulfillment of desire to create happiness, there is not the long-term value, quality fulfillment of happiness.
So here's the question. Is there meaning in the world, or can we create meaning?
Finn, let me just ask this one. Finn, I heard you got something from Chris that allowed you to see into the world.
Yeah.
A different way. So let me ask you, because you were fairly positive about certain things about the world. What did you enjoy so much about it? What was it? What did you enjoy so much about it?
About when I put the glasses on?
Yeah.
It was like in that film, They Live, where he puts on the glasses.
Okay, so I'll give the introduction. Finn is colorblind. Chris came to see Finn in Cordoba, and Chris gave Finn the Enchroma
yeah.
glasses. and chroma glasses that allow you to see color as being colorblind. And what you mentioned to Chris was like, what was the one thing that you wanted to see?
I wanted to see nature, to see a sunset.
Right. So I'll ask you again: is there meaning outside of us?
I think we create it.
Yeah.
I think we create it. Yeah. I don't think the universe has a set meaning. I think it's a property of the universe that meaning is possible. But I think that more or less we create it.
It allows the possibility for right. I see a lot of meaning in the universe around me.
That's like maths. Do we discover maths or do we create maths, right? Like, it seems to be a similar answer.
Yeah. To go back to the glasses thing, like, I wouldn't even say that I was happy with the glasses, because that doesn't really kind of sum it up. It was just like one of those, it was an experience that was so surreal. And it was just like one of those awe moments.
No, I wasn't pointing out for the experience of the glasses, more so the fact that you mentioned nature as being right. Rather than going to a party and see flashy lights at the party, you wanted to go to nature. So I was wondering if you might have felt that the existence of the natural world gives some sort of meaning. I think Einstein got a lot of meaning from the world around him.
I just don't know if that meaning is in the world. Like, would nature have meaning without humans there to experience it, or other animals who are capable of higher order thinking, right? I don't know if it would. I don't know if that meaning would exist.
I think nature is very flexible. I think in a quantum mechanical way we do assign meaning, right? Because we literally change the experiment with our observation.
Yeah.
At the same time, I don't know, I've done psychedelical drugs that I've seen sort of meaning in the existence itself. And the observation of existence can give me a lot of meaning and happiness.
I think for me too, personally, but I wouldn't say that necessarily for everyone. For example, nature is meaningful, right? Clearly to a bunch of people, they don't
noticed
care.
People that have been raised in London or Bangkok, for example, have no connection to nature whatsoever. And I will take them out to a beautiful place, and their main thing is just, this is dirty. Can we go home?
Yeah, or like Carl Pilkington. Carl Pilkington gets sent to travel the world, and he's just like, Great Wall of China. He's like, it's a bit shit, isn't it? Goes through all these beautiful Sahara deserts, like just loads of sand is getting in my shoe. It's like, mate, what? I think the universe has the ability within it to have the concept of meaning. But I think, like, from a pragmatic point of view as well, it's like, isn't it more interesting that we can create our own meaning? And it's like what you wrote to me, Marijn. Het leven is wat je ervan maakt. Geniet van jouw eigen creatie. It's like, life is what you make of it. Enjoy your creation, right? It gives us this kind of freedom to create the meaning that we want in life, right? And I think the universe, that's a property of the universe. But I don't think it's something that we can search for and find necessarily.
Just to get out of the philosophy a bit, because it confuses me, frankly. For me, that Enchroma story was different, because from my perspective, and it's everything, a combination of a bunch of points we've hit on earlier. I am at a point where I'm earning more money than I ever have, and it's enough that I'm free enough that if I want to go see Finn for a weekend in Cordoba, I can just do it. I don't even have to look at the cost. I'm like, I'll do it. And then while I was there, I won another big deal and was getting even more money. And it just seemed ludicrous to hold on to it. And it's something that I'd been talking to Finn about for years. Oh, these glasses, they can make you see color. And there was just a few instances where it's just been really clear that Finn isn't seeing the same sunset I am. Right? Like, we walked past a beautiful girl in an orange top, and Finn was like, oh, look at that girl in the yellow top. And like, me and Itamar looked at each other like, okay. And I just realized, like, you know, that money wouldn't make me any happier. And you know, giving money to Finn wouldn't have done much for his happiness, I don't think. It's not what drives him. But I knew I could do that. I had the freedom to help out a friend. And that was really exciting to me. And that made my life happier and more meaningful. And I'm in a position where it's not just success that I can boast about or feel proud of, but it's success that can be shared with people I care about, with tangible things that will add value to their life. And that moment, realizing the decision to do that, I haven't spoken to you about this, Finn, but that trip to Cordoba has changed my life, because ever since then, I've just been looking at how can I help people around me, because I've spent my life just dedicated, I say, when I was a hedonist, to just helping myself, and it made me miserable. And I don't want to be a martyr. I'm not saying I'm going to become Mother Teresa and give it all away, but
sure, but just do certain tangible things.
So my sister's unhappy in her job, and I just said, okay, Danny, like, what course would you like to do and I will pay for that course. Like, go for it. And do you know what was funny is just saying that meant that she applied for a better job and got it. I didn't even need to lend her the money, but just knowing that it was an option and having that conversation with her, like, how can your life get better? Let's talk about that. Got her excited and then made her pursue the opportunity. And then I'm sure there's a ripple effect of her being positive and comforting to the people around her.
Definitely.
There's a network effect.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm enthused and supercharged.
So this I find this very interesting, right? Because it seems that, and I agree with this, that there's first of all correlation between your own individual happiness and the money you have, right? That's what we scientists have established, right? Until a certain mean, you get happier. And then you get even happier, as Chris describes, with being able to share this with others and put others until a certain mean. But at the same time, what is happening is growing income inequality. So are we assessing right now that people are going to grow unhappier and unhappier and unhappier because less people will be able to get to that mean, less people will be able to share that mean with others?
It really comes down to the redistribution model that we use. And basically, Chris is, in a sense, talking about a redistribution model, but I think it does have that ripple effect and it does have a knock-on effect, and it will, for example, I'm going to give, let my brother have a go with the glasses, and then that's going to have an effect on his life. And another friend was like, oh, tell me the name of the glasses. I'm thinking about getting some, and then maybe it will spread like that. The same with your sister's example, Chris. I reckon it's a huge ripple effect. Hopefully, we talked about Bill Gates earlier. Hopefully that happens with the richest people in society. And then we get into the political side of it. Should we be forcing the richest people to participate in a certain amount of redistribution? That's maybe the topic for another. All society
right, as what Rutger Bregman said at Davos, taxes, right? We're talking about philanthropy. We should be talking about taxes. And it went all across the world.
Yeah.
For a reason, because the redistribution of wealth is the most central theme, I think, to the future of happiness.
Yeah, I would love not to have to force people, but it just seems unavoidable. I think you have these Pareto effects where people hoover up all the money. I don't think it's terminal. If you look at the big railroad companies when America was expanding westwards, right? Like there were 4 monopolies that owned everything. And now those companies, maybe one is still around in some format. Likewise, halfway through a big digital revolution. And so, yes, there's been a few big players that have got way ahead. Like Bill Gates. He was 20 years before, Google and Facebook. So he's realizing now it's more money than he could ever spend. So what to do with it, right? Mark Zuckerberg hasn't quite got there yet. He hasn't quite realized, everyone's hating you and your empire's going to crumble. Yes.
Yeah, but we're talking about individuals here, but then what about companies? It's like, because companies don't die, they don't have a reason to do that.
Companies are soulless, right?
Maybe we should set a maximum timeline for a company of 100 years and then they die.
I disagree with that because then you're going to kill a good company as well as a bad one. I hinted at this before that I would love, and again, there are models when America has done this, where if you're spending money on helping your workers, research and development, on helping society, you don't get taxed on that investment. But if you're just hoarding it like a dragon on gold, you're going to have a problem with the village, right?
We're going to have to slay the dragon, like Jordan Peterson would say. Yeah.
We should get sponsored by him.
Yeah, it makes no reason why not to hold companies responsible for the happiness of the workers and the well-being. I mean, they have so much power in current society. They consider themselves so important to global economy.
Well, that's it, right?
So important that if they're in problem, then the government has to come out and save them.
When Apple workers, they have to install nets to stop people jumping out and killing themselves, then Apple's made too much profit at too high a cost. Same with, Bangladeshi farms of children making Nike garments. It's just unacceptable completely.
But now we're talking about international law, right? This is such more complicated.
But these are the travesties and the injustices that make people unhappy, right?
There's no way to enforce international law. They're doing it in China, and that's why they're getting away with it. If it happened in America, they wouldn't get away with it, but it's happening in China. And the governments are not telling Apple, okay, we're going to ban your product because it's been causing deaths in China. So now you can't sell it here in Europe. No, because we all want a piece of the pie.
But one world government is a libertarian's dystopian nightmare, right?
I know, that's so weird, isn't it? This idea that Alex Jones has had this conspiracy about globalism and one world government. And I even used to kind of believe in it myself about the whole Illuminati thing, right? And then like actually it's like, but that really makes sense.
Yeah, David Icke,
that really
right?
makes sense, right? If we're gonna sort this problems out, we need something like that. You know, it just depends how you run it.
Well, that's why everyone's longing for mum and dad to come and clean
You
up
need
the
to
mess,
enforce international law. You need to have a
Yeah.
global body that enforces international law.
With oversight, independent oversight, and
right now it's not.
some kind of system that reins in its power when necessary.
Exactly.
I'm sure we could do that, can't we? That's got to be pretty easy.
Exactly.
Yeah, that reminds me of a quote. The far right is dreaming of a global age that never was, and the far left is dreaming of a utopia that never will be.
That's a bit pessimistic, isn't it?
Utopia is within our grasp.
That's what I'm here for.
Unless we screw up the planet before we get there. Hey, you know, we're talking about happiness, and we've mentioned our boy JP and our lad Zizek. They're having a meeting, aren't they? A meeting of minds.
Oh, that makes me happy. I love that. It's like the Roman gladiators, like battling. It's really exciting. Honestly, for me, it's like
Can't wait.
the most exciting MMA fight. I can't wait to watch them debate.
I can't either.
I think Zizek is a good
I think they'll just get so wordy and neither of them will listen to
No,
each other.
like
will they?
Zizek's going to
I've
destroy
seen-
him with jokes, with like chauvinistic jokes, and JP's going to collapse in a fit of laughter. That's my prediction.
I've seen Peterson fail to have a good debate. His first debate with Sam Harris was beautifully awkward when they just tried to sort of out-jargon each other. It got very weird. So it could go either way.
But Peterson's had two amazing debates with Russell Brand.
I don't hold Sam Harris in nearly the same degree as Zizek.
Oh,
Sorry.
God, yeah. No. There's all sorts of problems with Sam Harris. If you look at he's very inconsistent. The blind eye he turns to American imperialism. He gives Israel a complete free pass on everything because, in his words, Dick Cheney's good and Hamas is bad. There's all sorts of things Sam Harris does very simplistically.
Dick Cheney, the clue's in the name. He's not good, is he? So the topic of their conversation is going to be happiness, communism versus capitalism. And what will be fascinating is that they're both anti-political correctness, which is interesting. So I wonder whether they'll find some common ground there.
I mean, there's not many people for political correctness, right?
Well, I think there is. I think Stuart Lee is a great example of one comedian who talks about the necessity of political correctness. Like it made a massive reduction. Well, this is a topic for another conversation, but it had a huge impact in the UK, for example, on racism since the 1940s.
Absolutely. And I think political correctness is a straw man, boogeyman of like, you can't
Yeah.
say anything these days because political correctness got
Yeah,
made.
EU, most Brussels and bureaucrats. You can't even say 1 ounce anymore, can you? It's terrible.
We all use imperial when we buy our drugs.
They don't in Spain or in Holland, I don't think. By the gram.
You did when you're in England. No one's too European to use the metric when they're calling their dealer up in England. Shut up. Get Brussels to have a word, won't you? Sort it out.
Yeah, it's bloody terrible. The EU has no power whatsoever.
They just don't buy enough drugs, clearly.
I think it's a good point to talk about any common logical fallacies. So how about this? Instead of us talking about common logical fallacies, which we've done for the first 9 episodes, given this a mini milestone, episode 10, why don't we invite all of our listeners to call out any logical fallacies that they hear us or our guests making? If I could bring people's attention to yourlogicalfallacyis.com. That's a great website that has like really common logical fallacies. It also has some cards that you can print off. It's got a poster. It's also got a load about cognitive bias. You know, we kind of know a little bit about it already, don't we? Logical fallacies, but I want people to get involved and call us out on it because that's the problem. It's like you don't always realize when you're committing those fallacies, right? So I think it could be good for us. It could be good for our listeners. Or let's each do a quote. I've got a quote as well.
Beautiful.
I've got one. See if you can guess who it's by. It's quite easy. Life is a series of natural and spontaneous changes. Don't resist them. That only creates sorrow. Let reality be reality. Let things flow naturally forward in whatever way they like.
The Dalai Lama?
No, he's Asian.
Is that Theresa May?
No, he's quite old. He's from ages ago.
Jackie Chan.
No, much older.
Lao Tse.
Confucius.
Close. He was before
Lao Tzu?
Confucius.
Lao Tzu.
Yeah, that's him. That's our boy Lao Tzu. Yeah, man, with Taoism. Love a bit of that.
Can you edit it so we just got it first time? Yeah, brilliant, thanks.
Nah, I'm leaving the Theresa May joke in there. That was great.
Meringue, a quote from you?
The Vietnamese Chan master Thich Nhat Hanh, and he said, letting go gives us freedom, and freedom is the only condition for happiness. If in our heart we still cling to anything, anger, anxiety, or possessions, we cannot be free.
My favourite quote when you're using quotes is if Oscar Wilde said, I suppose quotation is a passable substitute for wit. Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, this is a wonderful song by a dear friend from school called Rob Turner. Hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
From Cordoba, I'm Finn.
From Amsterdam, I'm Marijn.
And from Southampton, I'm Chris.
Already a bit late, how long can it take to get on the lift and then up to reward like a year? Like actually a year. You said check out that necklace, the guy sat next to us, it's massive and it's coated in diamonds like a chandelier. A neck chandelier. I guess you don't have to piss on a white stick, 'cause they're calling us in. They cover you with jelly, and they switch on the telly. Scans look like aliens swimming up in space. Space inside your pants. How come it beats so loud? It's been amplified. Still makes me so proud. Like a screenshot of the snow globe that rolls onto the floor in Kane's Xanadu. Back in the office, knocking back office, trying to focus on what a 19-year-old is saying. It's no use. All I think about is you two. And I know we can't tell. Hair or eyes or much else, but I've seen the photograph, 'cause they covered you with jelly and then switched on the telly. Scans look like aliens swimming up in space, the space inside your pants. How come it beats so loud? It's been amplified. Still makes me so proud. Still makes me so proud of my alien swimming up in space. The space inside your pants. How come it beats so loud? It's been amplified.
Guys, how do we bring this home?
We can't. It's so fair.
I think it's a good point to talk about any common logical fallacies.
Can you edit it together somewhere?
I had something about this. I swear I did somewhere.
Cut some fat out somewhere and just put the logical fallacy somewhere.
Nah, I think it's good the way it is. Do we need to do logical
We
fantasies?
ran off on the
Finn's going to do the chaos edit. This is going to be brilliant. Like, as we really are. This sounds a lot more Joe Rogan than our other podcasts. Just a rambling conversation of
The
semi-coherent thought. I love it.
Yeah, it's like we hardly talked about happiness. We talked about love stuff, but we hardly talked
Clearly,
about happiness.
like, happiness isn't a priority for any of us, really. Like, we just like chatting shit with friends. That's happiness to us, and fair enough. Like, why not?
Well, that's yeah, probably. Happiness is this podcast.